Chapter 1. The Grain of the Wood. The rain in Port Solitude didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. It was a heavy, gray drizzle that clung to the wool of Arthur's coat as he stood outside the daily grind, waiting for the neon open sign to flicker on. It was 6:58 a.m. The sign always buzzed at 7 a.m. exactly, unless old Elias was having trouble with his hip again. Inside the glass, Arthur watched Elias moving with the slow, deliberate momentum of a glacier. The old man was wiping down the counter, pausing to squint at a smudge that refused to leave the laminate. Elias wore a faded green apron that had seen better decades, the strings tied in a complicated knot around his waist. He wasn't looking at the door. He was looking at the espresso machine, a temperamental chrome beast that hissed steam like an angry cat. Arthur checked his watch. The second hand swept past the 12. 7 a.m. The lock tumbled. The door chimed. "You're wet," Elias said, not looking up as he turned back to the grinder. "It's raining, Elias." Arthur stepped inside, shaking his umbrella out on the rubber mat. He didn't move further into the shop until the umbrella was strapped tight and placed in the bucket. The sign isn't on. Bulb's gone in the O. Now we're just pen. Doesn't seem right advertising myself as a writing utensil. Elias tapped the side of the grinder with a wrench. "Besides, this thing is jammed. A bean the size of a marble. If I can't get it out, you're drinking drip coffee, Arthur." Like a peasant, Arthur moved to his usual table, the one near the radiator but facing the street. He took off his coat, folded it lining side out, and draped it over the chair. "Drip is fine. Drip is tragedy in a cup," Elias muttered, finally applying torque to the machine. Through the window, the town was waking up, though it looked reluctant to do so. Across the street, the bakery delivery van was double-parked, blocking the bike lane. The driver, a young man with hair dyed a violent shade of blue, was arguing with a traffic warden. The warden, a woman Arthur recognized as Mrs. Gable, was pointing emphatically at the curb, her mouth moving in sharp, staccato rhythms. The boy threw his hands up, nearly dropping a tray of bagels. Arthur watched the interaction. He noticed Mrs. Gable's shoes, sensible, orthopedic, soaked through. She had a bunion on her left foot that made her lean slightly to the right when she shouted. The boy, conversely, was wearing canvas sneakers that offered no protection against the puddles. He was shivering. "Did you hear about the blockage on 4th? Elias asked. The grinder suddenly roared to life, shattering the quiet. Elias looked triumphant. "Huh, victory." "No," Arthur said. "What blockage?" "Sewer line. City says it's tree roots. Must be a massive tree to back up the whole block." Elias began tamping the grounds, his movements practiced and rhythmic. "Mrs. Higgins claims it's fatbergs. Says the restaurants are dumping grease. She's organizing a petition." Mrs. Higgins organizes a petition for everything. She petitioned the sun to shine last July. Elias chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. Said it was fading her drapes. He brought the cup over, the ceramic clinking softly against the table. "One Americano. Black. No sugar. No joy." "Thank you." Arthur stared at the steam rising from the cup. He didn't drink immediately. He watched the condensation form on the window pane. A drop gathered weight, sliding down, collecting smaller drops until it hit the sill. The door chimed again. It was Sarah, Arthur's assistant at the restoration shop. She was wrestling with a raincoat that seemed 2 sizes too big, her red hair frizzed from the humidity. She looked like she had just lost a fight with a wind tunnel. "Don't speak to me," she said to the room at large, heading straight for the counter. "Elias, give me something with enough caffeine to kill a small horse." "Rough morning?" Elias asked, already reaching for a larger cup. "My cat threw up in my shoe. The left one, the one I need to drive." Sarah slumped against the counter, sliding down slightly. "And my landlord called at 6. He wants to inspect the pipes. I told him the only thing inspecting my apartment at 6 in the morning is my nightmares." Arthur took a sip of his coffee. It was scalding, bitter, and perfect. "You're late, Sarah." She turned, blinking at him as if just realizing he was there. "I'm 3 minutes late, Arthur. And I have vomit shoe trauma. Cut me some slack. Besides, the varnish on the Davenport desk needs to dry for another hour anyway. The Davenport needs sanding between coats. It doesn't need to dry. Details, details." She grabbed her cup from Elias. "Put it on my tab, Eli. I'm good for it once my paycheck clears." Your tab is longer than the Magna Carta, Elias noted, but he wrote it down in a small notebook anyway. They left the shop together, walking under the awning of the adjacent buildings to avoid the worst of the rain. The town of Port Solitude was built on a slope, everything running downhill toward the harbor. The air smelled of salt and diesel. "Did you hear about the news?" Sarah asked, stepping over a puddle that reflected the gray sky. "Another missing person report. That hiker from up north. They found his backpack near the trailhead, but no sign of him." Arthur adjusted his scarf. "People get lost in the woods, Sarah. The terrain is treacherous." "Yeah, but 3 and 6 months? That's not getting lost. That's a pattern." She stopped to look at a window display in the hardware store. It was a pyramid of paint cans, but the one at the bottom had slipped, making the whole structure look ready to collapse. "I think it's bears. Or a cult. Definitely a bear cult. Bears don't form cults. You don't know that. Maybe they're organizing. Like Mrs. Higgins." Sarah laughed at her own joke, a bright sound that echoed in the empty street. Arthur didn't laugh. He was looking past the hardware store, down the alleyway where the dumpsters for the restaurants were lined up. A stray dog, a mangy terrier mix, was sniffing at a black plastic bag. The dog froze, ears pricked, looking at something deep in the shadows of the alley. It whined, tucked its tail, and bolted in the opposite direction. "Come on," Arthur said, turning away. "The Davenport won't sand itself." The shop, Penhaligon Restorations, was cold. It smelled of sawdust, linseed oil, and old time. The space was cluttered with the skeletons of furniture, chairs with no seats, tables with 3 legs, a grandfather clock that hadn't ticked since the 1920s. Arthur hung his coat on the designated peg. He put on his work apron, a heavy canvas stiff with dry glue. He walked over to his workbench, where a set of chisels lay in perfect parallel alignment, organized by width to the millimeter. Sarah bustled in behind him, turning on the radio. A pop song played, tinny and incongruous in the silent room. She began banging around in the back, looking for the sandpaper. "Where did we put the 220 grit?" she shouted over the music. "Second drawer. Left side. Behind the steel wool," Arthur said softly, though he knew she could hear him. He picked up a small, curved pick. On his bench sat a Victorian jewelry box, mahogany with brass inlays. The lock was jammed. The owner, a nervous woman named Mrs. Gable, the same woman screaming at the delivery boy earlier, had brought it in 3 weeks ago. She claimed the key had snapped off inside. Arthur magnified his vision with a jeweler's loupe. He could see the jagged edge of the brass key caught in the tumbler. It was a simple mechanism, really, a lever lock. He inserted the pick. He didn't force it. He waited. He felt the tension in the metal. It was like a handshake. You had to know exactly how much pressure to apply. "Found it," Sarah yelled. The scratching sound of sandpaper on wood began a moment later, rhythmic and harsh. "Shoo-shoo, shoo-shoo." Arthur closed his eyes for a second, listening to the friction. He visualized the wood fibers being torn away, smoothing down, becoming uniform. He twisted the pick. Click. The lid of the box popped open a fraction of an inch. Arthur removed the loop and set the pick down in its assigned slot. He didn't open the box immediately. He looked at the dust motes dancing in the shaft of light coming from the high window. "Arthur," Sarah called out. "This leg on the desk is wobbly. I think the dowel is rotted." "I'll look at it after lunch," Arthur said. "It's 8:15 in the morning. Then I'll look at it later." He opened the box. It was empty, save for a lining of crushed red velvet. The velvet was worn in the center, an impression left by something heavy that used to sit there. He ran a finger over the indentation. He felt a calmness settle over him, the kind of absolute silence that exists at the bottom of the ocean. He picked up a lint-free cloth and began to polish the brass inlay. Small, circular motions, over and over. The tarnish didn't want to leave, but Arthur had more time than the tarnish. He had all the time in the world. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, moving away from them, toward the woods. "Sounds like trouble," Sarah said, pausing her sanding. "Focus on the grain, Sarah," Arthur whispered to the empty box. "Go with the grain, never against it."